Well, now, we saw Sir Geoffrey Howe's result coming through. I don't know whether Sir Geoffrey is going to remain Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's made noises that perhaps 4 years is enough. We don't know what's going to happen to him, but we do know the person who would have been Chancellor in a Labour government had one going to be formed tomorrow. And that's, of course, Peter Shaw, who's at his constituency, who during this campaign put forward his alternative policy. He's down at his count at Bethnal Green and Stepney with Martin Young.
Peter Shaw, are you going to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, or are you resigned to a Tory landslide at this stage?
No, I'm not resigned to anything at this stage. And we're really still only at the beginning of the evening.
But there are signs already that the alliance is biting very hard into the Labour vote. Do you take comfort from what's just happened at Wrexham, or do you see the evening going badly for you?
Well, I see really Wrexham as being typical, as what I would expect to happen. That is to say that of the 30 or so Labour defectors who went over to the SDP, I expect Labour to win back.
Mr. Shaw, I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there and hand back to David in the studio.
Sure.
And at Blaenau Gwent, Michael Foot is now arriving. He's picking his way up the steps of the leisure centre where the count is being held. He's a little later than we'd expected, but he has beat most of the votes because they aren't here yet. There's his wife, Jill Craigie, who's done a lot of campaigning with him, and he's still very fresh, surrounded by some rather weary security men. We're trying to get a word with him.
We'll comment later.
It does rather look as though the vote is crumbling.
Have you heard the Wrexham result?
I did indeed, you
right,
held that.
16% Labour for
let's just wait until we have a few more results, then we'll have plenty of time to comment properly. That's the way to do it.
But there are surely clear signs that you're losing ground to the alliance.
I think the way to do it, is to wait and see when we've got a few more results in, that's the time to comment, and we'll have plenty of time to do it, and that's the sensible way to do it, and that's the best way to go.
Don't the polls, though, look to be right?
No, they don't even look that, but still, we'll have time to compare it, and I'm so plenty of time to do it. Not likely.
Mr. Foot refusing to be drawn, a wise man at this stage in the proceedings. He's going into a television lounge where he'll be out of the gaze of the cameras, but able to keep an eye on us. Back now to David.
Let's see that result from Yeovil, the first Liberal gain of the night from Yeovil in the West Country by a hefty majority, 3,400. That's taken by Paddy Ashdown. It was the seat that used to be held by the former, many years ago, Transport Minister John Peyton, who retired at this election. Here's the share of the vote there in Yeovil. Labour losing its deposit, incidentally. Just have a look at the share. We haven't got it for the moment, I gather. But anyway, the Liberals have been fighting hard at local level in Yeovil. They'll be very pleased by that result. Their vote going up 19% and Labour down 16%. So really taking almost the entire gain in their vote from Labour. Now, Peter Shaw is waiting for us patiently and kindly down there at his count, so let's go back to him.
Peter Shaw, I'm sorry that we've had to keep you waiting there, but you promised the electorate an £11 billion reflation if you were to become Chancellor, and they seem to have turned you down. Are you not astonished by that?
Well, yes, in a way. If that is if the electorate really understood that the no-change policies of Sir Geoffrey Howe, who has just been re-elected, as I understand, by his own constituents,
That's right.
if they understood that those policies will simply continue to depress British industry and increase the number of people unemployed, I think they would be only too pleased to support a programme which offered them some hope and relief and some prospect of expansion in the economy.
But many of them appear to have chosen the Alliance, who were offering a much humbler reflation of the economy than your party. Why do you think that's happened?
I don't really think that has happened, although I should watch the evidence. I think what has happened is fairly predictable. Number one, in the south of England, where often Liberals have been second for some elections past, they've done rather better. But in the north of England, what I think you saw at Wrexham a moment ago is Labour recapturing from the defecting SDP people the seats that have been Labour in the past.
Is there going to be a new leader of the Labour Party as a result of this election?
That's, of course, a matter to be decided. But Mr. Foot, I'm sure, will make known his intentions when he's ready.
Peter Shaw, thank you very much. Back to David Dimbleby.
Well, at 12:15, we've had 15 results in. So let's just stand back for a moment and have a look and see how things are going through the country. Peter.
Well, it's absolutely intriguing, David. We have now 15 results in. Here are those results. 8 Conservative wins, down 1. They've lost Yeovil. There is that Liberal SDP gain down there in the south of Somerset, Yeovil. You can see that orange dot on the map. That's our first gain of the evening after 15 results. And the intriguing thing that's happening is the variation in the swing over the country, because, as you said earlier, there is, as Peter Shaw was saying, there is a less of a movement in the north to the Conservatives than there is in the south. In fact, in the north, the Conservative vote is falling by about 3%. And the Labour vote is falling by about 13% in the south. So what's happening in the north, there is only a small swing to the Conservatives. In Wales, there's a massive 10% swing in that one Wrexham result, and that, if it was repeated in Cardiff, South and Penarth, could incidentally see Mr James Callaghan out of a seat. And then in the Midlands, we have no swing yet. That's the key place, because in the Midlands are a very large number of Labour marginals. We're waiting to see what happens in the Midlands. 5% swing to the Conservatives in the south.
Can I just tell you, we have had one result from the Midlands. Nuneaton has been a Conservative gain while you were talking.
Right. Well, it's interesting to see. Nuneaton, of course, a very, very marginal Labour seat. It'd be interesting to see just by how much the Conservatives have gained it. And the forecast on the basis of those 15 results, 381 Tory seats, 219 to Labour, 27 to the Liberal SDP alliance, and the others on 23. The changes on what we think the last Parliament would have looked like: the Tories are up 25, Labour down 21, the Liberal SDP alliance down 6, and the others up 2. There's the 326 seats, the winning post, and now you see that Conservative majority, which we started off forecasting at about 146, is down to 112. It's dropping. David.
So we've had 2 gains, one the Liberals in Yeovil, one the Conservatives in Nuneaton, and you may have seen Rennie Short has hung on after that recount in Wolverhampton, we think. Now, we heard from Peter Shaw, so fair's fair. Let's hear from Sir Geoffrey Howe. Geoffrey Howe was talking after his safe victory in Surrey East a moment ago to our correspondent Mark Rogerson, who was, of course, a former economics correspondent for the BBC, so they talk the same kind of language. Let's join them.
I'm delighted that my own poll has recorded exactly the same percentage as last time. As I said in my speech, that there has been a certain regrouping amongst my opponents. The Labour Party have lost their deposit. For my part, I'm delighted that our own policies have been endorsed as firmly and as decisively as on a previous occasion.
On the national picture, the computer forecasts are in the order of 120 overall majority for the Conservatives. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm obviously delighted if the majority turns out to be that, but the computer fluctuates in its predictions. The non-computer of East Surrey has given us a decisive result here, and that's a very good pointer, I hope, what will happen in the rest of the country.
If you are back for another 4 or 5 years, will you be able to get unemployment down like you've managed to get inflation down over the last 4 years?
I certainly hope we shall be able to make some progress in that direction.
How quickly?
I won't add to the various comments that have already been made on that.
Sir Geoffrey, you've been...
I just ought to correct one point. I said that Rennie Short was safely back in Wolverhampton North East. I misread it. It was actually the candidate from Wolverhampton South East, who's Robert Edwards, who's 77 years old, one of the oldest candidates, one of the oldest MPs he'll be in the House, the oldest, I think, in fact, in this House, fought in the Spanish Civil War, and he was safely back in a safe Labour seat, with his vote, incidentally, down 11%, the Liberal vote up 16%. It tells you something about what's going on in the Midlands, anyway. Now, let's just have a look at this Nuneaton result. This was the Conservative gain in Nuneaton. Lewis Stevens taking the seat, as a result of a fall in the Labour vote, down 15% or so, and the SDP coming in third there, after Labour, but taking enough of the Labour vote to let the Conservatives go through in that Labour marginal and take the seat. Turnout, incidentally, quite high at 77%. Always worth noting, we put the turnout at the bottom there. If you're interested in how many people went to the polls, that tells you, and 77 is pretty high. Robin.
Well, I'd like to bring in Alan Beath, Chief Whip of the Liberal Party in the last Parliament, and I understand technically during the election as well. What do you think of Yeovil?
I'm absolutely delighted.
You were banging the desk, weren't
Yes,
you?
absolutely. At least my first new member to whip in the next Parliament, but indeed the first triumph
to welcome. You haven't got in yourself yet, have you?
Well, no, I shan't know until tomorrow afternoon. But it's an excellent result. It's one which we'd very much hoped for, because a lot of hard work had been done in Yeovil. Could I just correct Peter Shaw on one point? He thought that Tom Ellis of the SDP had been defeated at Wrexham. He was wrong, of course, because Wrexham is split 2 ways, and Tom Ellis is standing in the Clwyd South West seat. So the Wrexham seat is not in any... Not at all.
That was Peter Shaw or Peter Snow?
It was Peter Shaw who was
well,
commenting.
Peter Snow wouldn't make it.
Oh, no.
Eric Varley, what do you think of this business so far? Are you disappointed, or is it better than you expected, generally?
I'm disappointed, and it's a bit worse than I expected, quite frankly. I think it's going to be a pretty depressing defeat and a depressing night for the Labour Party. It's not the end of the world, and we shall recover at some stage, but it's depressing so far.
And there's got to be an inquest, hasn't there?
Oh, there'll have to be a discussion about all these things, yes, and there will do.
Would you be a candidate for the leadership if Michael Foot decides to go?
No, I will not.
Why not?
I don't think I
You're
will.
the nearest thing to a real trade union working class chap at the top.
I think there'll be a lot of candidates, and there'll be a great scramble, and I don't think I want to scramble.
The Earl of Gowrie has been brought in. He's not a candidate for leadership, except possibly in the House of Lords. But what do you think of things for your party so far?
Well, I think the remarkable thing is, Robin, that this likely victory is happening at a time when not just the government, but the voters recognise there are very great difficulties in the economy. That is a really remarkable thing. And if I had to, in a sort of word, give an explanation for it, I think of that very chilling remark made by the Chief Civil Servant in Ted Heath's day, Sir William Armstrong, when he said that the governance of Britain was about the orderly management of decline. And I think the Prime Minister simply refused to accept that analysis, and we are seeing her orchestration of the public mood in the same direction.
Can I just ask you all to comment on a statement just made by Mr. Ken Livingstone, Labour leader of the GLC, who, well, we'll comment on it a bit later, but it's quite interesting. David?
I think we're... Oh, yes, Shirley Williams in Crosby. There we are, Shirley Williams arriving at her... I'm sorry, I was confused for a moment about what we were going to
Shirley
see.
Williams,
Shirley Williams with our reporter.
Shirley Williams here in Crosby. What do you make of an alliance vote that seems to promise you, in the end, fewer seats than you had in the last Parliament, and perhaps even more importantly, very few SDP seats?
Oh, what I make of it is that the electoral system is absolute rubbish. Here we are, cutting into the Labour vote deeply, cutting into the Conservative vote to some extent, and the predictions on the computer reflect not the popular will, but of course the fiddle that is our electoral system. And I suppose I now feel some of the anger that Liberals have felt in the past at any system that can so little reflect the popular will. I suspect at the end of tonight we're going to see a situation in which the Alliance will have actually won votes against both the old parties, in which the Alliance may well have won more popular votes than the Labour Party.
Do you really believe that will still happen?
Oh, I think that'll still happen. I must say all the evidence up to now in the south of England shows that the Labour Party is falling apart and that the SDP Liberal Alliance is picking up the extra votes of protest against the Conservative government.
I heard Jim Mortimer talking about the virtual eclipse of the SDP.
But it doesn't mean that, you see, because what we've actually seen is Labour lose deposit after deposit in the south. We've seen it slashed in a place like Wrexham, which was thought to be a safe Labour seat. It's been pushed back into its old heartlands. That's all that's left to it. And what Jim Mortimer is talking about is not the moral victory, which is the victory of the Alliance, but the purely technical victory which flows from a system which I believe in many ways is now profoundly unfair, and I might even say corrupt.
After your quite astonishing by-election victory in '81, you were talking in the moment of euphoria there as if the Alliance might even form the next government. Why have you so signally failed to make this breakthrough, do you think?
Well, I think we are making a breakthrough. I think we're making perhaps more of a breakthrough against Labour than we are against both parties, and therefore the Conservatives will form the next government. But I think that what we have now seen is a situation in which the Alliance is poised to become the opposition, the real opposition. My own belief is that Labour will fall apart after the election, and I think that as the Conservatives more and more prove that the promises they've made are false, we will pick up by-election after by-election, in my view, when the swallows come home to roost, and the swallows will come home to roost for this
Very quickly, are you going to win tonight?
I don't know. I've never pretended I knew, and I still don't know.
We'll talk to you later on.
All
Thank
right.
you very much, Shirley Williams.
Fine.
Back to you, David, in London.
Well, we will, of course, have that result declaration with Richard Lindley from Crosby the moment it comes through. Now, Peter, on the
David,
changes in the Midlands.
In the Midlands, just because of the quirks of the boundary changes, the Labour Party have a very large number of highly marginal seats from the Conservatives. Here's a map of the Midlands. After 4 results, we have the Tories on 2. They've gained 1. They've gained that Nuneaton seat. That's the big slab of blue down there in the bottom right of the screen, just to the east of Coventry. The Labour Party then on 2, down 1. They've lost that seat in Nuneaton. Here are the changes in the share of the vote in the Midlands. Now, just look at these figures. Tories down 2% on 40%, Labour down 11%. Now, that movement to the Conservatives in the Midlands is going to mean quite a lot of seats going down. I can see Philip Whitehead in Derby North going down to the Tories, Geoffrey Robertson in Coventry North West, John Golding, perhaps even, that stalwart figure on the right wing of the Labour Party in the National Executive, perhaps going down in Newcastle under Lyme. That's a long shot, but it might happen. Exciting prospects there, too. Just one more look at that map in the west of the Midlands for the Alliance on this basis, because they're up 13%, the Alliance. They just could be looking for some of those big slabs of territory down there in the bottom left-hand corner, Hereford, Limster, Ludlow, Shrewsbury. That kind of seat on that kind of movement just could be looking like an Alliance prospect.
Let's just have a look at one result which has come in, which is Roy Mason, former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. In Barnsley Central, his majority has gone up from 12,000 or so to 14,000 or so. Though his actual share of the vote has fallen just a tiny bit. The Conservatives fallen 7% or so, and the Liberals have gone up nearly 10% there. But anyway, Roy Mason in the comforting position of having his share of the vote go up. That's incidentally a curious seat, because there were people in the NUM, Arthur Scargill, for instance, who was trying to get him deselected, removed from that seat. He fought back and he kept it, and now he's won it with an increased majority, which is the proof of the pudding, if you like. 2 recounts, one at Great Grimsby and one at Hyndburn. So that's 2 recounts coming up. Now, with me is Tony King, Professor of Politics, student of British elections, like Bob Mackenzie, who sadly missed tonight, a Canadian student, who always seemed to know more about British politics than anybody else. But Tony King has been watching this election from behind these screens here, seeing more than we can see right out front. Now, what do you make of it so far? We've had only 24 results in, but what do you detect is happening?
This ought to be a dull election. After all, the Conservatives are going to win. They're going to win easily. It's turning out to be an absolutely fascinating election, partly because there are so many totally unpredictable individual results. All the Gang of Four, for example, and quite a number of Labour MPs as well. But on top of all that, you've got in this election, unlike any previous election since the war, a serious race for second place. And the race for second place is clearly a race for the future of British politics, which is going to be the opposition party to the Conservatives in the election of 1988 and the election of 1992. We don't yet know. Tonight is going to play a very large part in deciding which.
It's rather early days to tell what sort of result there's going to be in the popular vote, actually, for the Alliance, isn't there? Which is going to be one of the determinants of that.
That's absolutely right. And one of the figures we're going to be wanting to watch all evening long is whether Labour or the Alliance are going to finish second. But there's a very interesting pattern emerging in connection with tactical voting. What's clearly happened is that in those seats where the Liberals were already second, and there was a substantial Labour vote to be squeezed, that Labour vote is being squeezed. We saw that happen clearly in Yeovil. But the same thing isn't happening the other way around. Where the Labour Party has been the traditional first or second party, we still see that the Alliance is forging ahead, as in Nuneaton, for example.
Good. Well, Tony, we'll be back later on for more comments on this election. In the meantime, the chairman of the Conservative Party has arrived at his count at Hertsmere, Cecil Parkinson, and he's there with David Jessel. So let's go and hear what he's making of the results this evening.
Yes, Mr. Parkinson, when you spoke to Fred Emery at 11:30 when only 3 seats had declared, you were slightly cautious. Are you now prepared formally to claim victory?
I'm not prepared formally to claim victory, but I'm prepared to say I'll be amazed if we lose.
You think you've won, then?
I think perhaps the most significant result I've heard so far was the result in Pendle in the northwest. That was a critical marginal seat for us with a theoretical majority of just over 1,000, and we won it by nearly 6. And I think that's very encouraging. I hope to see us increase our representation in the north and the northwest, and I think that shows that there's a very good chance that we will. And of course we've also won Nuneaton, which is a Labour seat. So yes, I'm rather more than cautiously optimistic. I'll say I think we're going to win, yes.
The second story of the night, apart from a Tory victory, is bound to be the 10 million, maybe, votes for the SDP Liberal Alliance, which are going to end up with just a handful of seats. Have you any word of comfort to say to those people who appear to have been effectively disenfranchised?
I just listen with interest to people like Shirley Williams talking in this way, and Roy Jenkins will do it. But I didn't notice when he was Home Secretary.
We have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Mr. Parkinson.
We
have to go back now to David Nibbleby. Thank you very much, Mr. Parkinson.
16504. McGee, Bryan.
Social Democrat Liberal Alliance.
9,448. 9448. Nielsen Hansen,
Conservative.
Waldemar Tor,
Labour have regained Leighton.
11,988.
So Harry Cohen for Labour has won back this seat from Brian McGee, a major SDP loss at Leighton.
1,198. And I hereby declare that Harry Michael Cohen is duly elected for the said constituency.
Labour regain Leighton.
Margaret Jay giving us the result there from Leighton, where Brian McGee, the last person you saw there in the spectacles, a philosopher who was a Labour Member of Parliament, who became, or defected if you like, to the SDP, has gone bottom of the poll at this general election. Labour regain it with a majority of 4,500. Harry Cohen, a young accountant, has taken that seat. Let's just see how this happened. Here's the share of the vote today. Labour 44%, Conservatives 32%, and the SDP in third place with 25%. And this is how it's changed since the last election. The SDP there shows up high, of course, because there was no SDP man before. The Labour vote is down a bit, the Conservative vote is down a bit. But nevertheless, the truth of the matter is that in this London constituency of Leighton, Brian McGee has lost. He defected to the SDP, one of 28 or so who did, and he's lost this evening. Now, we've got another result from Oldham West. This is Michael Meacher, left-winger, held on to Oldham West with a majority of 3,000. In a marginal-ish seat, his vote went down a bit, the Liberals went up a bit, the Conservatives came down as well. This is in the Greater Manchester area. Michael Meacher, who you could say appears on television when Tony Benn isn't available. He's a sort of great supporter of Tony Benn's. Well, that's one way of putting it anyway. And now, Sir Robin.
Well, I want to ask Eric Varley if he's cheered up a bit by those last couple of results.
I'm cheered up a bit by Leighton, and I'm cheered up by Oldham too. But I've always thought in this election, or I thought over the last 24 hours or so, that the Liberals would do better than the SDP. And I don't know that I'm pleased about that, but the Liberals have an honourable record of fighting elections and an honourable history in that, whereas some of these SDP people, of course, just left the Labour Party, made no complaints about the electoral system. For example, we've heard Shirley Williams talk about the electoral system being corrupt. She was a Labour MP for, 15 years, and she sat on the Labour Party National Executive. I never heard her mention the electoral system or how it should be changed. So I think the SDP will be squeezed. The Liberals will, on the basis of what we've seen so far, do well.
Do you have any comment on that, Alan Beath, and on your Social Democratic colleagues, whom you've obviously persuaded in their thought friendship with you to change their mind?
Absolutely. There's much joy in heaven over the repenting sinner, you know. But in fact, there are many people in the SDP who were fighters for electoral reform when they were in the Labour Party.
One didn't hear much about it.
Oh, there certainly were quite a number of key people in the Labour Party who fought
for it. Roy Jenkins was walking along the streets saying...
No, but there are a number of prominent people in the SDP who fought hard for electoral reform when it was very much a lost cause in the Labour Party, and there still are some people within the Labour Party, a very small minority, fighting for it.
Well, I sat around the same cabinet table with Shirley Williams for about, 5.5 years, and I can't recall her ever mentioning it.
Roy Jenkins claims that he did ask for some sort of inquiry into it when he was Home Secretary. But, Lord Gowrie, you were about to say something. Do you think there will be an overwhelming demand for electoral reform if the result is something like what we think it's going to be?
I don't think there will be at all, because I think the issue about electoral reform leaves out the fact that what the British people do at general elections is hire and fire their executives. And really that is extremely difficult to do under a proportional representational system, as I sometimes see in my own country of origin, the Republic of Ireland, where one can have coalition governments. I don't think that will be acceptable here myself. But I'm glad that Eric Varley is cheered up, but it seems to me that one thing he shouldn't be too cheerful about is that these results are showing how much more in tune the Conservative Party is now with traditional Labour voters than Labour politicians. Now, this was always the dream of Harold Macmillan, who was considered widely to be a wet. And yet it seems to me Mrs. Thatcher, who is not considered to be a wet, who's brought off the Macmillan dream of making real inroads into Labour voters.
Hold on, we'll come back. Hold on, Eric, if you don't mind. We just want to go to David Dimbleby.
I never understand how the Western Isles declares so fast. But anyway, according to our headline there, the SNP have held on to the seat in the Western Isles. Labour's regained, that's from the SDP, has regained another seat in Worsley. That's John Roper of the SDP out. We've got 5 recounts going on at this moment, all in safe or safe-ish Labour seats, among them Austin Mitchell's at Great Grimsby, Carlisle, Hyndburn, West Bromwich West. Now this is at just after 12:30, the state of the parties. 17 Conservative, Labour 15, Lib SDP 1. It doesn't mean all that much at the moment until those figures build up a bit towards the 326 majority that the Conservatives will need to form this government. But let's have a look at our prediction, Peter.
Here it is, David, after 34 results. There it goes. It's Conservatives on 393, the Labour Party on 210, the Liberals on 20, the SDP 4. That result from Leighton was bad news for the Social Democrats who deserted the Labour Party. We reckon that Brian McGee took about 4% in terms of a personal vote there, an extra personal vote on top of what the Liberals won last time in Leighton. So that is very bad news for those SDP defectors. We don't reckon more than 4 of them are going to win altogether. Here are the changes on what we reckon the old Parliament would have looked like in the new boundaries. 37 up the Tories, 30 down Labour. The Liberals up 9, the Liberals are doing all right. The SDP are not doing too well, they're down 18 on what they would have been, and the others are up 2. And there's the winning post, the 326 the Tories need for an overall majority, and they're way through with 136 majority forecast.
Let's just see a few results we've had in while Peter was talking. Here's one of them, Worsley. This is Labour regaining. John Roper of the SDP being defeated, going 3rd place in the poll, not quite losing his deposit though. And another one, Putney, David Mellor, junior minister in this government, holds on. Peter Hain, Labour, his vote down. Peter Hain, you remember, from the anti-apartheid movement. And now we go to Slough for Joan Lester's declaration.
Thank you. I, the returning officer for the Slough Borough constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given to each candidate at the election was as follows. Nicholas Bokenquet, 9,519. Ian Findle,
Ecology,
325. Graham John,
National Front,
528. Joan Lester,
Labour,
18,958.
That's 36%. Just 36% for Joan Lester. The MP for Slough for 16 years.
John Watt,
Conservative,
22,000.
42%. So Joan Lester is out. A Conservative gain in Slough. Majority of 3,106. That's a 42%. And Labour loses one of its few seats in the southeast and one of its leading left-wing MPs and unilateralists. So from Slough back to David Dimbleby in the London studio.
And here is the result from Slough. Joan Lester, who's held this seat since 1966, defeated at Slough. The Conservatives take the seat. And this is the share of the vote there and the change. So there's the Labour vote down 7% in favour of the SDP, which was why they were booing, Joan Lester's supporters booing the SDP, because they'd taken, and they knew it, her vote, and let the Tory, on a 4% increase, slip in and take the seat of Slough. So Joan Lester, left-winger, was actually kicked off the NEC because she supported, well, it said because she supported the wrong candidate for the leadership, but anyway, she was kicked off the NEC, but for years was a prominent NEC member and was chairman of the Labour Party conference. The Conservatives have gained Swindon. And Margaret Jay has now got Brian McGee, the defeated SDP candidate for Leighton, and she's with him down there. So let's join them straight away.
Brian McGee, you came third in Leighton. It doesn't look as though the mould has been broken here, does it?
It certainly hasn't been broken in Leighton, no, and it was an enormously disappointing result. It would be absurd to pretend otherwise. But I think in the country as a whole, we're doing very well tonight in terms of votes, if not seats.
But how many seats do you expect to have at the end of the night?
Well, I just don't know. I think it's silly to try and predict at the beginning of a long night. It's clear that the electoral system works against us in an outrageously unjust way. And one thing tonight's results are going to produce is the most powerful argument ever for proportional representation.
Do you regret having left the Labour Party?
Oh, no, no. I didn't leave the Labour Party in order to join the SDP. I left the Labour Party because I simply could not go on in the Labour Party. And many more people are going to find that after tomorrow.
How is the SDP going to go on if it loses as many seats as it seems to be going to in Parliament?
Well, obviously it's going to be hard for us. I've always been a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist as regards the prospects for the SDP. I think the key to the situation is still, as it was from the beginning, what happens to the Labour Party. If the Labour Party goes down, and it seems to me absolutely downward bound and nothing can stop its decline now, nationally, then I think we must come up. It's inconceivable that the country could be a one-party government country for long.
Brian McGee, thank you very much.
Just before we go for David Owen's result we're going to have in a moment, let's just see these ones that have come in the meantime. Just have a look for Swindon, for instance. The Conservatives gain Swindon, majority of 1,395 there. Darlington, now this is an interesting one. Darlington, which Ossie O'Brien, you remember, won at the recent by-election. And the SDP did very badly there. The SDP appear to have done better tonight, just a little bit better there in that seat, and as a result they've let the Conservative, Michael Fallon, through. His vote didn't go up very much. Bob Cryer, I just hear, has lost Keighley. The SNP have held on to the Western Isles. There's Donald Stewart's vote there, his share going up a tiny bit. A lovely part of Great Britain, that. Mainly, or largely, Gaelic-speaking. Nearly 80% of them Gaelic-speaking. Now, as we wait for David Owen's result to come from Plymouth Devonport, let's just hear from Peter how the tin brain is working things out tonight.
Well, it's working out.
That's not his brain, that's the machine he operates.
My brain doesn't have to work at all. Well, I just press these buttons here and up come the pictures. There we are, total gain 7. Look how the country's going, and all sorts of real tapestry of colour there, from the Tory gain up there in the north, right down there to the orange Liberal gain down in Yeovil. It really is an extraordinarily interesting situation with 4 Conservative gains, 2 Labour gains. There's a regains from the SDP, and the Liberal SDP alliance there winning that seat in Yeovil. Let's have a look at the gains now in a bit of detail. The Conservative gains from Labour, first of all. Darlington, biggish majority there, that by-election only a couple of months ago. Swindon has gone, Slough has gone, Nuneaton has gone, and there are the Labour gains from the SDP. David?
First of the gang of 4 then to get his result, Plymouth Devonport, David Owen.
Are we live? Yes, we are.
And now, after what has apparently been a very cliffhanging count here at Plymouth Devonport, the Lord Mayor is about to make the declaration.
Okay. I, the undersigned, as returning officer for the Plymouth Devonport constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Robert Edward David Beresford Walker,
British National Party,
72. Faith Hill,
Christian Democrat,
51. David Anthony Llewellyn Owen,
SDP,
20,843. Julian Gordon Priestley,
Labour,
9,845. James Edward Sullivan,
Independent Conservative,
292. Anne Noreen Widdicombe, 15,907.
So David Owen coming in ahead of the Conservative there by some 4,000 votes, which is much higher, 4 times the majority he had here as a Labour MP last time, and much higher, I must say, than those of us watching in the hall had expected from the apparent closeness of the count. Formalities, the congratulations happening on stage there. and David Owen, the victor here.
My Lord Mayor, on behalf of us all, I would like to thank you, the returning officers and the staff who manned the polling stations, those who did the count tonight, and the police for the conduct of the election, which has lived up to all the traditions of impartiality which we're well used to here in the city. I would like to say to the other candidates that my thanks for a fairly and freely conducted election. To the party workers of the new Social Democratic Party, I must give a special word of thanks. To our Liberal partners for all their help here in this constituency, again, I must say a very big thank you. To those people watching this result outside in the country, I hope this will be a sign of a major new political force. To those in the Social Democratic Party, we have retained our individual identity. We have established a social democratic tradition. We have laid down roots for the future, and they will blossom and grow, and this tree will grow until eventually we become, with our Liberal partners, the government of this country. I would say to everyone who has made this possible, here in the city of Plymouth, which I was born, a big thank you for vindicating my faith in democracy and for showing that it is worth holding to your principles and fighting for what you believe in.
So David Owen, one of the most forceful and trenchant speakers in this 1983 election campaign, safely back to Parliament. We hope to be speaking to him later. In the meantime, it's over to Crosby, where Richard Lindley is talking with Shirley Williams.
Shirley Williams, what do you make of that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely marvellous. And I think what it means is that the Social Democratic position in Parliament, whatever happens to the rest of us, is absolutely safe. Because David is a brilliant leader. I think he's got the potentiality to be a very great leader of this country. And in my view, that means that the SDP, as well as the Liberal Party, is here to stay, and in my view will unquestionably become the opposition very soon and the government not long after.
His point was that you'd really saved your identity as an individual party.
That's absolutely right. But
Were you in doubt about that?
Well, David was rather pessimistic. I never thought he was right. I went down to Plymouth a couple of times. I saw the kind of personal loyalty that surrounded him. And I think people can see an outstanding person when they encounter one. So I'm absolutely delighted. I couldn't be more pleased. And I think that David will lead the SDP contingent in Parliament and will lead it in a most distinguished way that will be of great benefit to the future of this country.
Shirley Williams, thank you very much. Back to you, David, in London.
Well, the news she didn't hear was that Mike Thomas has lost in Newcastle East. Here is David Owen's quite remarkable result from Plymouth Devonport, standing not for Labour but for the SDP for the first time in Plymouth Devonport, majority of 4,900. Here's his share of the vote, 44% to him, 43% to Conservatives, and Labour right down at 21%, even though they were said to have minded his going into the SDP, but it's vindicated, one of those West Country seats where the character perhaps counts for a great deal. There were characters against him too, including J.B. Priestley's grandson. Incidentally, while we're on names, Sally Oppenheim's son won a seat, Amber Valley for the Conservatives, and Dave Nellis, the militant, won Coventry South East, and Mike Thomas lost Newcastle East. So those are three results we've had for... And also Austin Mitchell, I hear, has held on to Great Grimsby, where we had a recount a moment ago. Let's just see how Mike Thomas lost his seat in Newcastle East. Labour regain it with a majority of 7,492. And Mike Thomas goes down to the bottom of the poll there. One of the liveliest figures who helped organise the original SDP launch. And now from there we go to Glasgow Hill Head, where we hope we may be able to hear from Roy Jenkins. I'm not sure that they're ready for the declaration. Roy Jenkins looking quite cheerful up there, in my view, at Glasgow Hill Head. In fact, we may be able to hear from our reporter there what he thinks is happening.
Well,
Kate
David, it's only a few minutes now from the declaration. We know that there's been a turnout of 72%, and indeed, yes, we are only minutes away. There was a possibility a very short while ago of a recount, so it shows how close the result is going to be. Give us a few more minutes, and I think we'll be with you.
Well, we'll see whether those smiles on Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins' face were justified a bit later on. Let's just see the state of the parties now. This is how things stand. We've had 74 results in so far. The Conservatives on 46, Labour on 25, Liberal SDP on 2, others on 1. There's a great deal to be discussed there, and while we wait for a few more results to come in, let's go over to Robin Day.
Mr. Valley, now I'm going to... Yes, Mr. Valley, you were making some interesting notes and quiet noises as the SDP's fates were revealed. Owen first, David Owen. That was a remarkable result, wasn't it?
It was a remarkable result, especially coming after the local elections in which we did quite well in Plymouth, and I thought that David Owen would have a great deal of difficulty holding on, but clearly he has, and I think he's an exception. He's had a good deal of exposure during this general election as a national leader of the alliance, and of course that's clearly helped him. But what's interesting, of course, is some of these other SDP people, as I predicted earlier, are losing, like Mike Thomas in Newcastle, like the SDP candidate in Leighton, like the SDP chief whip, John Roper. He's gone. And I would be very surprised if all the SDP defectors, or very few of the SDP defectors, actually win their seats. Very interesting to see what happens in Hill Head.
Lord Gowrie, what do you think of the results which have caught your interest?
Well, sad about Anne Widdecombe, because I'd like to see more women in Parliament. But it's interesting, I think, that David Owen is a national figure who caught the national mood and who, in his campaign pronouncements, was really rather closer to the Conservatives than the other members of the Gang of Four. The other results that interested me enormously were the gains in Slough and Swindon.
Can I just interrupt you, Lord Gowrie, please? We could just go and hear Mr. Parkinson speaking.
I could give another sign, but I won't. Ladies and gentlemen, may I, on behalf of my wife and myself, thank the electors of Hertsmere for re-electing me and giving me more than 50% of the vote for the second time and for the increased majority. And may I also take this opportunity of thanking the returning officer, all the clerks in charge of the polling stations who worked from 7 this morning until 10 tonight. May I thank all the counters and congratulate them on a remarkable improvement in productivity. 1:45 is a great deal better than 5:45, which is the time we declared last time, and I'd like to congratulate you on that, John, and this tremendous organization which has produced such an early count. I'd like to thank my opponents. I haven't met any of them before tonight, and and I hope they don't mind the joke, but if the past is anything to go by, I won't be seeing any of them again in the future. But I thank them for I thank them for a fair fight. There have been no personalities involved in this election, in this constituency. We've tried to argue issues, and I'm glad that putting our case over has been so successful. And so I thank my opponents for a clean fight. I thank my supporters for a marvelous result. And I promise you 5 years of sound Conservative government.
Cecil Parkinson, who may be on his way to a major position in the new Tory cabinet. I see up at Glasgow Hill Head, Roy Jenkins. I don't think it's any coincidence he's smiling. We're predicting that Roy Jenkins has won Glasgow Hill Head, or if you prefer it, has regained it after the by-election. While we wait for that Glasgow Hill Head result to come through, and any others, let's just go back to Sir Robin.
Well, I think I'm talking to Dennis Healy in Leeds East. Good morning, Mr. Healy.
Good morning.
What do you make of it so far?
Well, I think it's very broadly in line with the computer projections which both the BBC and ITN made at the beginning. That's to say, the Social Democrats will hold 3 or 4 seats, mainly seats where the individuals were extremely well known, but the 29 members of the SDP in the last Parliament will be shrunk to a fraction of that figure. Secondly, the Liberals will will win 1 or 2 seats they didn't hold in the last Parliament, but the alliance altogether will not be able to have any substantial influence in the next Parliament, still less, of course, form a government.
Would you expect there to be a new leader of the Labour Party fairly soon?
I would expect Michael Foot to take a decision on that matter, and like I think the overwhelming majority of the movement, I'd respect whatever decision he took.
And if he were to resign fairly quickly and let you become leader under the rules, as you would do automatically, would you accept such a position?
I'm not going to discuss hypotheses, Robin. You know me far too well to expect me to do so.
No, but you know me well enough to know that I'll have a go if I can.
Yes,
Let me ask you this, because this is interesting. Ken Livingstone, the left-wing leader of the GLC, has said tonight the struggle between the government and the Labour movement will now move outside of Parliament, and the limelight will pass from Parliament because of the big Tory majority. What do you say to that?
Claptrap.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Dennis?
Thank you.
David? Sorry, Dennis, I'm going
David,
back to
not Dennis, yes. Robin, thank you. Well, we're waiting for... There's a kind of neck-and-neck race between 2 other members of the SDP. Tom McNally, we hear, SDP, who was close to James Callaghan and who went over to the SDP, has lost Stockport. Now, Shirley Williams and Roy Jenkins' results are waiting neck and neck to be declared, so we're going to hear from one or other of those in just a moment. And perhaps while we're waiting for those 2 results to come in, 2 other prominent members of the Gang of 4, let's just see what Peter's got for us.
The map now, David, is building up very, very fast. After 92 results, we have this picture. Here it goes. 93 results. Conservatives on 56. Look at the little blue dots popping up all over the map, and there are the red dots coming up. There's the Western Isles right up in the top left-hand corner too, popping up in the SNP colours. The Conservatives are up 5, Labour are down 3, and the Labour-SDP alliance are down 2. And the gains on their own now, let's just lose all the other ones. There they are. The Conservatives have 6, Labour have 3, the Liberal-SDP alliance 1 on balance. There's that Yeovil gain that they have down there at the bottom. The SDP are losing seats, except, of course, for David Owens. And then we have this picture of the forecast after 94 results now. 94 results. The forecast is 398 Conservatives, 209 Labour seats, just about half the Conservative figure. Liberals on 17, the SDP on 3, David Owen is back, the others on 23. Here are the changes: up 42 the Tories, down 31 Labour, up 6 the Liberals, down 19 the SDP. That's really based on the fact that apart from David Owen, the other SDP deserters did very badly, and the others up too. There's the winning post and the Conservative majority, 146 forecast, up again.
I think we just have to say that that is pretty well what we forecast at 10 o'clock.
It's absolutely what we forecast. It's come back to where we began.
Fingers crossed that it will stay the same. Let's just see 1 or 2 more results that have come in. This was Tom McNally, his defeat at Stockport. Let's just see the figures there. Tom McNally in 3rd place. The Conservative Anthony Favell, a solicitor who fought at Bolsover before, takes the seat. Tom McNally, who worked for James Callaghan, is defeated. 3rd place, bad news. Now to Crosby for Shirley Williams' result.
And here now the mayor in Crosby, Councillor Miss Jenny Kemp. She's pretty angry tonight. The hall we're in now is no longer even in Crosby, it's in Bootle as a result of boundary changes.
I, Jenny Goodwin Kemp, being the returning officer for the Crosby constituency, hereby give notice that the total number of votes given for each candidate at the election was as follows. Peter Michael Hussey, 415.
Ecology.
Malcolm Thornton,
Conservative.
30,604. Robert David Waring,
Labour.
6,611.
Lost deposit.
The Right Honourable Shirley Vivian Teresa Brittain Williams,
Alliance.
27,200.
Conservative wins. Shirley losing.
I declare that Malcolm Thornton has been duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for the Crosby constituency.
And so Shirley Williams could not hold Crosby. She could not repeat her 81 by-election success. Malcolm Thornton, the strong Conservative candidate, wins.
David Owen, a great result for you here in Plymouth Devonport, but a disappointing one for Shirley Williams in Crosby. How do you balance the two out?
Well, she's done tremendously well. Let's face it, that was a Herculean task to overthrow a Conservative majority like that. I only saw it sad that Shirley hasn't got it. But I think that's a good result by any standards. As for my own result, well, obviously, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted. It's a tremendous victory, I must say. We're really pleased.
You were, I think, quite gloomy about your prospects earlier on. When did you sense that the tide had turned?
Well, I always said there would be two phases to this campaign. The first phase was that we had to demonstrate to the country as a whole that Labour wasn't fit to govern. That took us probably over 2 weeks. It was not really until the last 10 days of the campaign that people realised that they could abandon fear. They were driven to the Conservatives out of fear of a Labour government. Once that was no longer an option, then they began to look at us.
Can I break off?
Declaration coming in a few seconds.
Neil Carmichael, the Labour Party candidate, 13,692. John Collett Davidson, Independent Conservative, 249. Roy Harris Jenkins, SDP Liberal Alliance, 14,000.
Victory for Mr. Jenkins in Hillhead, Glasgow.
George Leslie, Scottish National Party, 2,203. John Frederick Robbins, Animal Rights Campaign, Scottish Anti-Vivisection, 139. Murray Tosh, the official Scottish Conservative Party candidate, 9,678. Alistair Whitelaw, Scottish Ecology Party, 239. I declare elected as Member of Parliament for Glasgow Hillhead, Roy Harris Jenkins.
Roy Jenkins in with a slightly reduced majority, fighting a larger constituency, this time with a lot of opposition from New Labour voters, but in and winning Hillhead by about 1,100 votes. 2,000 people in this large hall tonight. Shouts echoing round Kelvin Hall. Mr. Jenkins trying to raise his voice against the noise.
You have conducted this count, having got it out by far the first of the Glasgow results. It is in many ways a remarkable result, having had to swallow a large new injection into the constituency. I pay tribute to Mr. Neil Carmichael for the extremely clean and decent fight which he has fought. And I withdraw no word of the tribute to him which he was good enough to publish in his last-minute leaflet. He has
18,339 votes.
Labour.
I repeat that, 18,339 votes.
For the Labour candidate.
Davies, Harry Lonsdale,
Conservative.
16,469.
I make that about 33%.
Rogers, the Right Honourable William Thomas,
SDP Liberal Alliance.
14,630.
29%. Now, in case you missed, you were still at Hillhead, I think, when that result first came over. Cook, the Labour Party man, got 18,339 votes. He's won, but the sensation of the evening here at Stockton North is that Bill Rogers, who's held this seat since 1962, has been beaten into third place. The Conservative Harry Davies is second. Bill Rogers gets only 29% out of the vote.
Has been duly elected to serve as a member for the said constituency.
Consign to him, at least temporarily, the lovely and well-humoured people of Crosby, and ask him to look after them, as I'm sure he will endeavour to do. May I also say that I believe that we have had the moral victory, because Crosby is now, by any standards, a marginal Conservative seat, and it used to be the 16th safest Conservative seat in the country. From 19,000 majority in 1979 to a 3,000 majority in 1983 is, by anybody's standards, a moral victory. But let me add one other thing, and it is this. I also want to thank the marvellous people who risked more than just their hours of work, but in some cases have risked their standing in the community and to some extent even their careers in defending and working for the Social Democratic Liberal Alliance. May I thank my Liberal friends and colleagues in this constituency for the massive amount of work they have put in. And may I finally say to them and to my Social Democratic colleagues, you have established that we are breaking the mould, and we are a force, that will never, never die until it consigns this country to a better future.
Well, David Owen, we've heard your reaction already to Shirley Williams' loss in Crosby. What about the victory now of Roy Jenkins in Hillhead, but the loss of Bill Rogers up north in England?
Well, obviously I'm delighted that Roy has won, and that's a very great achievement. And I'm very sad to have lost Bill Rogers. In a sense, Bill and I were there together right at the start in the House of Commons when it was very, very difficult to establish the Social Democratic Party. And I always knew, and he knew, that he would have a very difficult task in that seat. But I hope it won't be long before he's back in the House of Commons.
What do you feel about the fact that very clearly, as a result of tonight's results, there's going to be no need for the title Prime Minister Designate of Roy Jenkins to be put into implementation?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask, because it's always been well known that I didn't like the idea of a Prime Minister Designate. I've always thought we are two separate parties fighting together as friends and partners, and I believed it would have been much better to have gone into the election with two joint leaders and offering the constitutional principle that whoever had the largest number of MPs would be the Prime Minister, and that we would all accept that. And I was always, I was not very happy, but I felt it was a matter for Roy and David to make, and they made that decision, and once they were happy with it, it was obviously something that was right for them to make. But I don't believe myself. I'm never wildly happy about it constitutionally, because it always seemed to me rather difficult for somebody to lead a party, two parties, if their own party, for instance, had the smallest number of MPs.
One of your chief arguments, certainly in the second half of the campaign, was that the SDP Liberal Alliance could prevent or help prevent a Thatcher landslide. That hasn't worked, has it?
No, I didn't really believe it. I thought that it was the best argument we could put up at that stage. I think that they've been heading for a very sizable majority ever since the Union Jack was raised over Port Stanley. That was a seismic change in British politics, the Falkland Islands. And I've always thought that the most we would be able to do would be to hold the balance. And as this election went on, I thought it was going to be extremely difficult. But that was an achievable objective, which many of the electors wanted to see. They did not want to see a Conservative landslide. Well, it looks as if it's going to be pretty big, whether it's a landslide or not. It's obviously she's there safe now for 45 years. I only hope she will listen to the electorate. The electorate wants a more moderate government, and the electorate above all wants a government that is going to do something about unemployment. And that is something Social Democratic MPs and Liberal MPs will fight very hard for in the next House of Commons.
David Owen, congratulations on your own result, and thank you very much for commenting on these others as well. Now back to David Dimbleby in the studio in London.
The curious thing is it's beginning to look as though the SDP representation in the new House of Commons is going to be all chiefs and no Indians. So far there's just David Owen and Roy Jenkins, and everywhere else they're falling like ninepins. The only Tory, for instance, to join the SDP, Christopher Brocklebank Fowler, he went down, lost his seat there. David Alton, on the other hand, for the Liberals, you may have noticed, took that Liverpool-Mossley Hill seat. And James Callaghan, there was one moment when people wondered whether he would even get back, though I think on sheer personality alone it was unlikely that he'd be defeated in Cardiff. He takes that, and he goes into the House of Commons, incidentally, as Father of the House, which is not the oldest MP in the House, which he won't be, but it's the MP who sat continuously for the longest period. He goes in at that. Another marriage arrives in the House of Commons with Anne Winterton, wife of Tory Nicholas Winterton, who took Congleton, and we've also just been looking at one quite interesting thing. The Conservative vote is down 2%. Worth noting all the time that they're not getting over 50% or even a majority. Down 2%, and yet Mrs Thatcher's getting a landslide because of this split in the vote of the opposition. Labour running 5% ahead of the Alliance. They're getting nearly 20 times as many seats. Let's just see one or two of the results that came in during that spate of them. Here they are. This is how Roy Jenkins held on by a whisker at Glasgow Hill held. 344 votes only from Labour, who noisily tried to prevent him making his acceptance speech. And this is how Shirley Williams lost Crosby. Conservatives took it. There were shifts in that constituency, which made it difficult for Shirley Williams, president of the SDP. Some of the Labour voters who might have voted for her moved out. Conservative voters came in, and the Conservatives got it by 3,400. And Bill Rogers in Stockton North came bottom of the poll. Bill Rogers, who made all the arrangements with the Liberals about which seat would be fought by the SDP and which by the Liberals, loses that. It's retaken by Frank Cook, a left-winger who was going to challenge Bill Rogers, actually, for that Stockton North seat even before he defected to join the SDP. So that's how things stand at the moment. Now, there was a man, you remember, who said to Sir Robin, and he may have lived to regret it, that, not Sir Robin, but the man who said it, Francis Pym, that he didn't think that landslides made for good government, and by landslide he meant treble figures. It looks as though Mrs Thatcher is heading for a majority of something like 146 at the moment, clearly a landslide. So what does Francis Pym have to say now?
Well, Francis Pym, congratulations on your landslide victory. What about it now? It looks as though your party may very well be heading for precisely that when you didn't seem very keen on it.
We don't have landslides in Cambridgeshire. This is a flat countryside, and my result, I think, is very much in line with what happened at the last general election. As to the general overall result, I wouldn't comment on our majority until we know exactly what it is. I think we need many more results to come in before we know its real size rather than its projected size. But what is quite clear is that the government has voted overwhelmingly to continue with the Conservative government, and I'm very glad, naturally, that it has done so.
Nevertheless, I mean, you say you won't comment on it. I must push you a little bit on it, sir, if I may. Surely it is quite clear now that the government is going to win the kind of majority you precisely said you didn't want it to win.
Oh, I said I thought 100 would be a very good majority.
But it's going to be more than that.
Well, I think so that is the projection, but let's wait and see what it really is. But it's quite clear that the country has expressed very strong confidence in the Conservative government under Mrs Thatcher. That's clearly their decisive verdict. The precise figures at the end of the day remain to be seen, and I think it is a very important election. It's also quite clear that the Labour Party is heading for a very bad result indeed, and that's going to have a very considerable impact on British politics, I think, of a very far-reaching kind. So the next Parliament is going to be an unusually interesting one.
could it also see the extinction of your wing of the Conservative Party in government?
No, certainly not. I mean, that's a ludicrous thought. The Conservative Party has always been a very broad-shouldered party. We are united behind our manifesto, the platform we fought this election upon, which some people have tried to pretend was extreme. Of course, it's nothing of the kind. Extremism and conservatism are contradictions in terms, and it's a very robust, realistic, honest policy that we've been elected upon, and that's what the country wanted.
And will you keep your seat in the Cabinet as Foreign Secretary?
That's up to the Prime Minister, and of course I expect to do so. That's up to her.
Francis Pym, thank you very much indeed. Back to David Wimberley.
That was John Simpson talking to Francis Pym, and now in Crosby, Shirley Williams talking to Richard Lindley.
Shirley Williams, why didn't the miracle happen a second time?
I think because the odds were frankly just too great. Not only did we have the inbuilt majority of 19,000 from the 1979 election, but the boundary changes probably meant some additional thousands on top of that. And I think I always knew it would be a kind of super miracle to win it. As it is, I think the result has been extremely good. I cannot be too grateful to my supporters who have worked themselves into the ground. And I do mean exactly what I said. I think this has been a moral victory, but alas, it hasn't been an actual victory.
But how can the SDP survive when its president loses?
Oh, it's fine. It's going to survive because it's got its leader and its deputy leader. It doesn't need me at the moment in Parliament, and I shall certainly contribute all I can as president of the party and the country. And as president of the party and the country, I'm probably the most expendable of the Gang of Four, because I have a role outside Parliament, whereas both Roy and David's role is essentially a parliamentary one.
Does that mean you're not going to try and get back? I know you don't like
heavens,
Parliament very much.
It's far too early to decide my future at the moment, and I would be daft to do so after as little sleep as I've had for the last few weeks. I will contemplate these things, but I have every intention of pitching all I can into the party. And let me say that although tonight the electoral system is going to deal us a pretty hard blow, I have no doubt whatsoever in my mind that the future is with us, and that we are going to be either the opposition or the government over the next few years.
Only 3 years ago, when you were still in the Labour Party, you were saying, I'm not interested in a third party. I do not believe it has any future. Has anything happened tonight made you think that perhaps is true after all?
No, I think at that time I believed that the Labour Party could be saved. I discovered later that the Labour Party couldn't be saved. And I think that anybody objectively looking at tonight's results would have to say that the real loser has been the Labour Party. If you actually look at the loss of votes, at the way in which the Labour Party has lost its deposit in the southern half of the country, I think anyone looking at that would have to say that the Labour Party is in deep, deep trouble, in a way that, frankly, the Alliance is not. The Alliance is not in trouble, the electoral system's in trouble, but as far as Labour is concerned, yes, it's in terrible trouble.
Do you now regret, because of that chain of events, standing in Crosby, such a difficult seat?
Absolutely not. I've had a marvellous year and a half here. It's been a great experience, and I think we've come close enough so that I feel very well satisfied.
You have, I think, a very melancholy record. You've been defeated twice at a general election within 4 years. Do you really say you'll come back?
I was defeated once at a general election, and I then took on an almost impossible constituency and won it at a by-election. I think that anybody looking at the mathematics would be surprised if I'd won tonight, and I think most people would be surprised that we even came that close. And the reason we came that close is because of the fantastic work that my
Shirley Williams,
have done.
Many commiserations. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Back to you, David, in London.
That's Conservatives taking the Speaker's old seat in Cardiff West there, but let's just see one or two other results that have come in. Dennis Healey's for a start. Dennis Healey in Leeds East, his majority is cut almost by half, down 6,000. Safely back in that seat, though, but with his majority cut in favour of the Liberals. And then Norman Tebbit in Chingford, who we saw earlier on, man who went fast in this cabinet, majority of 12,000, not much change in his vote, but the Liberals up, Labour down in Chingford. Isle of Wight, Mrs Thatcher's last visit yesterday in the hovercraft, trying to get Virginia Bottomley in there in the Isle of Wight, hasn't quite done it. 3,000 majority, well, hasn't nearly done it for Stephen Ross. So the Isle of Wight doesn't fall to the Tories as they had hoped it would. It used to be a Tory seat before Stephen Ross took it. And now, one of those, I think they were described by Mrs Thatcher as unusual people, former Chief Whips, Ted Heath, who's down at Old Bexley and Sidcup, watching our results programme with Hugh Scully.
Well, Mr Heath, Francis Pym seemed to be slightly backtracking just now when he was talking about his anxieties over a landslide. Do you share those anxieties of a Conservative landslide?
Well, I didn't hear what Francis Pym was saying, but I think what he was commenting on originally was that in any democracy you have to have an effective opposition. it's quite right that the government, when it's putting forward its policies, should be challenged by the other side of the House and made to show that they are the right policies and they should be examined, and if there are any weaknesses in them, then it's up to the opposition to expose them. If you have an opposition which is completely demoralized and in a state of chaos over its policies, then it's very difficult to have that.
But that may well be the situation in the next Parliament.
Yes, I think this is probably true as far as the Labour Party is concerned, because from the results which are through so far, it's quite clear that they have been almost decimated. And watching the campaign, it's quite clear also that their leaders have no clear policy about defence. That's in a state of chaos. And, of course, their policy about Europe has been rejected by the electorate. Now, I think this is quite right. I hope that as a result of this election, we can finally accept, and our partners will accept, that we are in the European community for keeps.
But you said that a government does need a challenge. It does need some kind of restraining influence.
Yeah.
If there is no effective opposition, who is going to provide that restraining influence on the Tory government?
Inside a party, you always have those who will discuss with the ministers and so on the policies which they're going to pursue. We did it in the last Parliament. We shall do it again.
You will be vigorous in your criticism of any extreme measures?
Well, I may also be vigorous in my congratulations of the government on the measures with which I approve.
But you will be critical if and when necessary?
Oh, yes, of course. And so will others.
Were Mrs. Thatcher to offer you a position in her cabinet, would you accept?
I've said for the last 8 years that if there was any job I could do which I was capable of, which was of use to the nation, then I would do it. But I didn't fight this campaign to get a job in the cabinet, and I have absolutely no expectations of any kind whatever.
But were she to offer you a post, you would accept?
Well, this is a purely hypothetical question.
But hypothetically, might you accept?
No, I don't accept hypothetical things. I've become used to dealing with matters of fact.
Would you like to return to a prominent position in public life?
Oh, well, if you're in public life, you always like to have a purpose and to be able to achieve that purpose. But I shall carry on the backbenches and look after my constituents. I shall comment on the great issues of the day and influence the House of Commons as far as I can.
Mr. Heath, thank you very much. And now back to David.
Well, let's just see a couple more rather interesting results that have come in, both where the SDP member in the last Parliament has been defeated one way or another. Let's have, first of all, Hayes and Harlington. Neville Sanderson there, third in the poll, was for the Labour Party in the last Parliament, defected to the SDP, defeated, Conservatives get through. Same old story. Cardiff West, on the other hand, slightly different. Geoffrey Thomas for the SDP moved down here to fight this seat, and he got nearly a quarter of the vote, which wasn't at all bad, and in the throes of doing it, did exactly the same damage to Labour and allowed the Conservatives, with a very small increase compared with last time, it's thought to be a Labour seat, very small increase in the Conservative vote, and they take it. Well, now, it's just 22 minutes past 1. We've had 217 votes. 217 seats declared. Let's just have a look now at exactly how things are going with Peter.
David, yes, and the map here showing the size of the Tory landslide. There they go. There they all go. 125, up 11. Labour on 84, down 5. Liberal SDP Alliance on 7, they're down 6. And the picture of the gains, this is the story that counts. 22 gains, 14 of them are Conservative. Labour have 5, the Liberal SDP Alliance have 3. And they're the ones who are doing all right, but the SDP are doing very poorly. They've only got two MPs back.
Well, now, let's go and hear from Roy Jenkins, leader of the SDP at Hillhead with Kate Adie.
Mr. Jenkins, 1,164 votes. Was it a victory that was personal, or was it for the SDP?
Well, it was a victory for the SDP, and perhaps the fact that I had paid a lot of attention to the previous constituency, but this new constituency was very different, with 40% added on to it. So I regard it as a fairly remarkable victory, which I'm very pleased about indeed. Particularly in view of the fact that our percentage compared with the by-election went up by about 4 points.
Your colleagues, though, are having very mixed fortunes tonight. Where does that put you?
Well, it puts me as member for Hillhead for the moment, and I very much regret that remarkable people, have not succeeded in gaining their seats. But what has been a striking feature has been the swing to the alliance. The fact that the Labour Party has polled less votes than it has at any time, certainly since 1931, maybe even since 1918. And we are in a new pattern of British politics. Whatever the number of seats, So far as the number of votes are concerned, we are in a new scene so far as British politics is concerned.
That may be so, but what are you going to do about those seats if they are so few? If you get the votes but you don't get the seats?
We are going to exercise our power in the House of Commons, such as it is, but we're going to exercise our power in the country because I believe that the British people fundamentally believe in a fair democratic system. And if the system produces a result which is a travesty of how they voted, that this will be seen as a scandal and the people will want to correct it.
To what extent do you see 1,100 votes as getting in by a whisker and feeling rather relieved yourself tonight?
Well, as I've told you, it was a very much more difficult seat than the by-election seat, which in what were normally regarded as more favourable circumstances, I won by 2,000 votes, and our percentage of the poll went up from about 33% to 37%, so I regard it as a very satisfactory result.
And looking overall, how so far do you think that the party is doing?
Well, I think what is certainly the case is that the alliance and both parts of it are having very substantial swings indeed to them. And this is a very striking feature of nearly every result which I've seen come through so far. But we'll see what happens in the rest of the night.
Mr. Jenkins, thank you very much indeed.
Well, lest you think that it's the SDP who've won this election, let me tell you it's not so far. They're going down still like ninepins. Another one went, Jim Wellbeloved and Erith and Crayford. It's only Roy Jenkins and David Owen, the two of the four original gang of four who've held their seats despite what's happening in the popular vote. Popular vote at the moment for the SDP running at about 24% or so. So let's just have a look. This is the state of the parties now, and we're predicting, remember, a landslide victory for Mrs. Thatcher. And at 1:25 in the morning, the Conservatives have 134, Labour 97, the Alliance only 7 seats, and other parties 1 seat. One or two results which have come in while we were away with Roy Jenkins. Let's just see those. This is the defeat of James Wellbeloved of the SDP, though interestingly he went into second place there. The Conservatives took that seat. David Evnett, who's a Lloyd's underwriter. James Wellbeloved has been there in that constituency since about 1965. Cyril Smith held on in Rochdale. His share of the vote very slightly up. He's been there since 1972. No need to say anything about him. Everybody knows him well. So those are 2 results in, and Labour holding Eric Heffer, left-wing Labour MP, holding on to Liverpool Walton. His vote only very slightly down. The Liberals doing quite well up there in the northwest at the expense of the Conservatives, for a change. So far most of it has been at the expense of Labour, but there in Eric Heffer's seat, Liverpool Walton at the expense of the Conservatives. Right, so anyway, we are still predicting this landslide. Our figures at about 10 o'clock tonight were pretty much on course. It's what we're getting at the moment. We've got a lot more interesting results to come in. We haven't, for instance, yet heard anything at all about what's gone on in Chelmsford. But at this point, let's just join Peter for a few more analyses of the figures.
It does look as if there's no question now that the race for second place in terms of votes is going to go to Labour. They look as if they're going to end up about 3% ahead of the Alliance. But of course, when you think of the number of seats that Labour are going to win compared to the number of seats the Alliance are going to win, that difference of 3% in the vote looks quite extraordinary. Here is the Liberal SDP Alliance picture at this time. 245 results in, 7 seats, down 7 on balance so far. They have been winning. The Liberals have been winning. They've got 3 gains. They've lost 2 to the Conservatives on balance, the Liberal SDP Alliance. They've lost 5 to Labour. Those, of course, are mostly those SDP defectors seats going back to Labour. They've got a 25% vote, up 12% on the Liberal vote last time in 1979. The Liberal SDP Alliance together have got 12% up on last time. Just not enough for that breakthrough in seats that they really needed. They're forecast to have 20 seats, down 13 on last time. And now here is that extraordinarily sad story for the SDP of the seats that they've lost. These are the SDP MPs in the last Parliament, and there they go, down one after the other. The Tories winning quite a lot of seats there at the expense of the Labour Party. The vote on the left there being broken through by the Tories as the vote is split there in places like Hayes and Harlington and down there in, let's see, Jim Wellbeloved has seat in Erith and Crayford as well. Roy Jenkins is back. John Horam has lost up there in Newcastle, Mike Thomas has lost, and David Owen is the only other MP to come back there and win his seat in Plymouth. But it's a very bad story here for the SDP MPs in the last Parliament. And here we see the other ones still to declare, and it can't be a very good prospect for any of them. David.
Tony Benn in Bristol East. You remember he had to move because his seat was abolished in Bristol. He wanted Bristol South and he didn't get it. There's a Conservative gain in Birmingham Northfield, that's John Speller, who took it at a by-election after the death of Mr Cadbury in a by-election during the last Parliament, just took it, he's lost it again. Bruce Millen holding on to Glasgow Govan. But let's go and hear what's happening down in Bristol East. We'll be there for the declaration, but David Lomax has been there all day following Tony Benn. David.
Well, here in Bristol East, the latest news we have is that we're expecting the result in the declaration in about 15 minutes. And we'll know then whether Mr Tony Benn, who in one form or another has represented various constituencies in Bristol for the last 33 years, will have survived a challenge from, well, there are 5 different candidates altogether in this particular constituency. The biggest challenge obviously comes from the Conservatives, but it'll be about 15 minutes before we know the final result. I've talked to all the party organisations today. The 3 main ones are all saying that they're very confident. There have been some looks of gloom from the Labour Party. The Conservatives are saying they're cautiously optimistic. We won't know for another 15 minutes. This is David Lomax in Bristol East. Now back to David Dimbleby in the studio in London.
We've had another rather interesting Conservative gain from Cannock-Burntwood. It's a safe Labour seat, and the SDP moved in and the Conservatives took the seat. We may get the figures for that in a moment. Now, Bill Rogers, I think... Oh, let's just see the figures, if we've got them. Yes, here we are. Conservative gain, Cannock and Burntwood. Now, the interesting thing is SDP intervention there has denied that seat to Labour, perfectly safe Labour seat, taken by the Conservatives. Now, Bill Rogers, you may have just caught, is up there with Luke Casey after his defeat in Stockton North. So let's hear from him.
Bill Rogers, first of all, your reaction to your own defeat here in Stockton North.
Well, it's always nicer to win than to lose, but I think that many people rather accurately forecast that this was one of the hardest seats to fight. The Labour Party had a 57% majority before today, and I have to say that I'm very pleased that myself and my team have really reduced that by between 1/3 and 40%. It's a tremendous result in terms of the collapse of the Labour Party, and if only the Tory party was not holding up better in the country, I would have been home and dry in what has always been regarded as the Labour heartland.
Can you seriously say that you expected to come third?
Yes, I did. Oh, yeah, I did say that. I did think that, because the mathematics were very plain. I had to both collapse the Labour vote, which I've done much better than I thought I would do, say, 2 years ago, but I also had to get some Tory votes. I don't think I've had any Tory votes today, or very, very few, and this will be totally in keeping with the pattern throughout the country. I mean, what has happened in this election is that this time the alliance has hit the Labour Party very hard, and the Labour Party is collapsing even in its best areas. We'll have to wait till next time. That's absolutely plain. Next time it will be the Tories' turn.
But you fought this campaign very much on your own personal appeal, your own personal record. You made very little play of your very, very strong membership of the SDP, your part leadership of it. Do you think in retrospect that was a mistake?
No, I don't think that anybody in Stockton ever failed to remember that I was one of the Gang of Four and I was a Social Democrat. I don't think they forgot, and anyhow others would have reminded them. No, I had to maximise the vote, and I think I don't like to claim a personal vote, but I think the result is a very remarkable one in the collapse of the Labour vote. And whether it was because of the SDP or the Alliance or me, I think is irrelevant. The fact is we have broken in here, and it's not a question of whether the SDP and the Alliance will overtake the Labour Party in the North. It's only a matter of when, and it may well be at the next general election.
What about your own career now? What happens to you?
Well, that's the least important thing tonight. I haven't really thought about that. I've been a Member of Parliament for 21 years. It has yet to be shown whether I have some hidden talents which I can live on for the time being. But it was a risk I took. 2 years ago, I thought that I was risking my life here. I was right to risk it because the cause is far bigger than any individual in circumstances like this.
Bill Rogers, thank you very much indeed. And now back to David in London.
Well, just grist to the mill of this argument about the SDP and the Alliance and the Liberals and their representation. We've just had the figures worked out, and as things are running, we've had 280 seats declared. In order to get one Conservative MP, you need 35,000 votes. In order to get one Labour MP, you need 36,000 votes. In order to get one Alliance MP, you need 453,000 votes, very nearly 500,000 votes for every one Alliance MP in the House of Commons. Now, one or two results that came in while we were hearing that interview with Bill Rogers, which are interesting, particularly perhaps this one, in Bradford North. Now, you remember this story. Pat Wall, militant, made the speech saying he wanted to abolish the monarchy, get rid of the judges, get rid of the generals, expected revolution. Militant candidate who Michael Foot stood with at Bradford North during this campaign has lost. Conservatives move in. Ben Ford, the fourth name down, independent Labour, picks up 4,000 votes, doesn't do very well. But have a look at the share and the change of the vote since the last election. Conservatives take it there perfectly clearly. Look what's happened to the Labour vote under that militant candidate. It's dropped 20% in that seat in the north, which is not to say that all militant candidates have lost. We've had two victories, one in Coventry, one in Liverpool Broad Green, for candidates from militant tendency. And Ben Ford lost his deposit there. So it might be a good moment, actually, to just have a look. Conservatives gain Southamptonshire, another SDP man goes down there. But this might be just a good moment to look at how Labour is doing with Peter.
Well, Labour, David, seem to be heading for the worst performance in terms of share of the vote since 1918, although it's touch and go. But it does look as if they're looking for 30% of the vote. Here is their position at the moment. After 273 results, they have 108 seats. That's down 7. They've lost 13 to the Conservatives. They've won, of course, some back from the Liberal SDP alliance. They've won those deserter seats back. Their vote is down 9%, down about 30% at the moment. They're forecast to end up with 209 seats, down 31. Now, here is the battleground between the Conservatives and Labour. Those are the most vulnerable Labour seats seated down there in the order from 1, Oxford East, the most vulnerable Labour seat in the country. Now, just look what's happened to those declared seats in that battleground. They're all going blue. Blackburn has been held against the trend there. But as they get safer and safer for Labour as we go down through the battleground, so Labour hold on there, except for Kingswood, that's gone to the Conservatives. There's Stretford, Halton, Coventry North West, they're being held by Labour. Number 60, Cannock, is a remarkable Conservative gain. The 60th most vulnerable Labour seat has gone to the Conservatives. Now we can have a look at our target. Now this is the target. This is the target area the Conservatives are aiming at. Those are the 60 most vulnerable Labour seats which the Conservatives want to capture from Labour. Let's just see how many they've captured. Now watch the way those shots strike the target. There are the Conservatives hitting at that target. On the whole hitting the outer rings, but there's Cannock right in the middle there, that safest of those Labour vulnerable seats. 9 have hit the target of the shots they've taken at that target in this vulnerable area, and 15 have missed. So of those 60 vulnerable seats, Labour have lost 9 to the Conservatives, but they've held on to 15. So on the whole, we're looking for something like 40 gains from Labour by the Conservatives. Cannock may be the exception.